Rudolf Hess had been deputy leader of Nazi Germany, only one place behind Adolf Hitler. From 1933 to 1941, Hess, a World War I infantryman and pilot, had been complicit in all the actions taken by the Nazis against its enemy.
4 entire nations kept watch over one man, and somehow he still died alone. I'm talking about Rudolf Hess, the mysterious right-hand man of Adolf Hitler, whose shocking death in 1987 didn't bring answers. It sparked even bigger questions. Was it really him, or had the real Hess been replaced years earlier? For decades, that question refused to die. But now, a DNA breakthrough has flipped the story on its head. And trust me, what they uncovered changes everything you thought you knew. Stick with me, because this story only gets stranger. Who was Rudolf Hess and why he mattered to Hitler? Rudolf Hess was born on April 26, 1894, in Al-Ibrahimiyya, a suburb of Alexandria, at a time when British control shaped daily life in that region. Life in Alexandria offered comfort and structure, since Hess grew up in a wealthy household where a father ran a successful export business. This business gave the family a strong position within the German community living in Egypt, and that environment shaped early identity in a very particular way. One might pause and ask, what kind of mindset develops when someone grows up German by culture but not by location? Hess attended a German-language Protestant school from 1900 to 1908, and education did not stop there because a father made sure private tutoring filled any gaps. Discipline, structure, and a strong sense of identity surrounded those early years. Then came a turning point at age 12, when Hess moved to a boarding school in Bad Godesberg in Germany. Imagine that shift for a moment. A young boy leaves behind a familiar environment in Egypt and steps into a country that would later define an entire life. Would that kind of move deepen a sense of belonging, or create a need to prove loyalty even more strongly? That question seems to linger when looking at what came next. Growing up under British rule also created an unusual layer in Hess's thinking. Instead of pure resentment, there was a kind of admiration for the British Empire, which stood out because many later Nazi leaders held very different views. That detail alone already made Hess a slightly different figure from the rest, even before politics entered the picture. Everything changed after an encounter that would shape the rest of Hess's life. Hearing Adolf Hitler speak in a Munich beer hall created a powerful impression, the kind that does not fade easily. A simple question comes to mind here. What kind of speech makes someone change direction so completely? Whatever was said that day, the effect was immediate, because Hess joined the Nazi Party on July 1, 1920, becoming one of the earliest members, specifically the 16th. That level of early commitment says a lot. This was not someone joining a popular movement at its peak. This was someone stepping in when the movement was still small and uncertain. Devotion to Hitler quickly grew into something deeper, something that many later described as almost religious in nature. After the failed beer hall putsch, Hess made a decision that still raises eyebrows. Instead of stepping away, Hess chose to return voluntarily to prison at Landsberg, simply to remain close to Hitler. That decision alone sparks another question. How far would someone go to prove loyalty? Inside that prison, Hess played a key role by writing down large portions of Mein Kampf as Hitler dictated ideas, thoughts, and plans. That moment placed Hess right at the center of something that would later influence millions of lives. By 1925, Hitler rewarded that loyalty by appointing Hess as a private secretary, a role that meant constant proximity and trust. As years passed and the Nazi Party grew stronger, Hess's position also expanded. By April 21, 1933, Hess received the title of Deputy Führer, a role that carried both status and responsibility. Later that same year, on December 1st, Hess also became a Reichsminister without portfolio. That title may sound vague at first, but the influence attached to it was far from small. Offices operated in both Munich and Berlin, and responsibilities covered a wide range of areas, including foreign affairs, finance, health, education, and law. Think about that level of reach for a moment. How does someone go from writing dictated notes in prison to overseeing multiple branches of government? That rise shows just how much trust Hitler placed in Hess. During the early years of Nazi rule, almost every piece of legislation passed through Hess's office before becoming official, except for matters directly tied to the army, police, and foreign policy. That meant Hess had a hand in shaping many of the decisions that affected daily life in Germany. Many decrees carried Hess's signature alongside Hitler's, showing clear involvement in administrative power. Yet despite this authority, there was always an understanding that Hess's strength came more from loyalty than from strategic thinking or leadership skill. Another question naturally appears here. What matters more in such a system, skill or loyalty? In Hess's case, loyalty seemed to matter most, at least for a time. Hitler valued loyalty deeply, and Hess fit that need perfectly. A dependable presence, always supportive, always aligned, always ready to carry out instructions without hesitation. That kind of reliability created stability within the inner circle. However, the situation began to change once the realities of war entered the picture. War demands different qualities. War demands quick decisions, sharp strategy, and strong leadership under pressure. As World War II began, Hess slowly started to fade into the background. More capable and experienced figures stepped forward, taking on larger roles in military and political decisions. This shift raises another quiet question. What happens when a system built on loyalty suddenly needs competence above everything else? In Hess's case, the answer became clear through gradual sidelining. Influence did not disappear overnight, but visibility and importance began to shrink. Even so, an important moment came after Germany invaded Poland on September 1, 1939. Hitler officially placed Hess second in line of succession right after Hermann Göring. That position carried huge symbolic weight. Being named as a possible successor to Hitler was no small recognition. But here again, another question sits just beneath the surface. Did that position reflect true confidence in leadership ability? Or was it simply a reward for years of unwavering loyalty? Many historians lean toward the second explanation. Hess had proven time and again that loyalty would never waver, and in a system built on personal allegiance, that quality carried enormous value. Looking at the full picture, a pattern becomes clear. Early life shaped identity in a unique way, mixing German roots with experiences under British influence. A powerful meeting with Hitler redirected an entire future. Loyalty opened doors that skill alone might not have unlocked. Responsibility grew quickly, but war exposed limits that had always been there. And through it all, one central idea remained consistent. Devotion defined Rudolf Hess more than anything else. That devotion brought influence, status, and proximity to power, but also placed limits on how far true authority could extend. When thinking about such a life, one final question feels almost unavoidable. Was Rudolf Hess a powerful figure shaping history, or a loyal follower carried along by forces much larger than individual control? The answer may not be as simple as people want it to be. It likely sits somewhere in between, shaped not just by personal choices, but by an environment that quietly rewarded those choices at every single step. And when you start looking at it that way, the story begins to shift in a way that feels both unsettling and impossible to ignore. Because this wasn't just about one decision, it was about a chain of moments leading to something far bigger. And that brings us to the moment that changed everything, the 1941 flight to Scotland. Stay with me, because what happened next rewrites everything you thought you knew. The 1941 flight to Scotland that changed everything. A strange and almost unbelievable chain of events began to unfold on the night of May 10, 1941, when Rudolf Hess made a decision that left even the closest people around power circles completely stunned. Late in the evening, just before 6 p.m., Hess quietly left an airfield near Munich and climbed into a Messerschmitt Bf 110, choosing to fly alone on a mission that no one had officially approved. Now just pause for a second and think about that. A top figure in a powerful government deciding to take off alone into the sky, with no clear authorization, heading straight into enemy territory. What kind of confidence, or maybe desperation, pushes someone to do something like that? Reports later explained that Hess flew up along the Rhine and then crossed the North Sea, navigating through a dark and foggy night using only maps and charts. No advanced guidance systems, no backup crew, just instinct, calculation, and belief in a plan. And another question quietly comes up. Did Hess truly believe success was guaranteed, or was there already a sense that this could go very wrong? The destination was not random. Hess aimed for Dungavel House, the home of Douglas Hamilton, a British nobleman whom Hess believed had influence over a group that might be open to peace talks with Germany. That belief alone raises eyebrows. How did Hess become so convinced that such a faction even existed? Was this based on real intelligence? Or was this a dangerous assumption built on hope? As the flight continued, fuel began to run low, and by around 10:30 p.m., Scotland came into view. The mission had already stretched into risky territory, and now a new problem appeared. The aircraft could not make it to the intended landing point. With no other choice left, Hess bailed out roughly 12 miles away from the target. The plane went down near Floor's farm at Eaglesham, crashing into the ground with its guns unloaded, which in itself was another detail that stood out. Why carry no ammunition on a flight into enemy airspace? That question alone added to the mystery surrounding the entire mission. On the ground, a local farm worker named David McLean came across the scene and helped Hess out of the parachute harness. Hess had suffered a broken ankle, which made movement difficult, yet there was still a strong sense of urgency in every word spoken. Hess did not reveal the real identity immediately, and instead introduced a false name, Captain Alfred Horn. That alone brings another question to mind. If the mission was meant to open peace talks, why hide identity at such a critical moment? Even while injured, Hess repeatedly asked to be taken to the Duke of Hamilton, showing a clear belief that some form of meeting was waiting on the other side of this risky journey. That confidence almost feels surreal. Was Hess expecting a warm reception after flying uninvited into enemy territory during wartime? The following day brought a moment that could have changed history, at least in theory. Hess was granted a meeting with the Duke of Hamilton, who at the time was actively serving and fully committed to Britain's war effort. Hess laid out a proposal that sounded bold, but also deeply unrealistic. The idea suggested that Britain would allow Germany to control Europe freely, while Germany would allow Britain to maintain control over its empire. Another condition made things even more complicated. Any agreement could not involve Winston Churchill or the current British government. Now just think about that for a moment. A proposal that asks a country to step aside from a war while ignoring its own leadership. How was that ever expected to succeed? Hamilton listened, but ultimately rejected the idea and handed Hess over to British intelligence. At that point, the mission had clearly failed, and the weight of that failure began to show. By June 16th, reports described Hess as mentally shattered, overwhelmed by the collapse of a plan that had once seemed possible. The pressure, the isolation, and the realization that nothing had gone as expected appeared to take a serious toll. A voluntary death attempt followed, signaling just how deeply the failure had affected Hess. That moment adds another layer to the story. Was this mission driven by loyalty, personal belief, or something more unstable beneath the surface? Back in Germany, the reaction from Adolf Hitler was nothing short of explosive. Albert Speer later described hearing a sound of pure rage coming from inside Hitler's office when the news arrived. Not controlled anger, not calculated frustration, but something raw and almost animal-like. That reaction says a lot. Hitler immediately worried about how this event would look to allies and enemies alike. Would this be seen as a secret attempt to negotiate peace behind closed doors? Would it signal weakness or division within leadership? In a moment of anger, Hitler reportedly expressed a wish that Hess had drowned in the North Sea, which shows just how seriously this situation was taken. Soon after, an official announcement claimed that Hess had been suffering from mental hallucinations, a statement that seemed designed to distance leadership from the unauthorized mission. Looking at the entire situation, so many questions remain. Was this a genuine attempt to end a devastating war? Or was this a misguided act built on false beliefs? Did Hess act alone in thought? Or did quiet influences shape this decision behind the scenes? The answer may not be as simple as it first seems. In fact, it likely sits somewhere in between, shaped by a mix of personal decisions and an environment that quietly rewarded those choices at every turn. But just when you think you've figured it out, the story takes a sharp and unexpected turn, one that shifts everything you thought you knew. Because there was a moment, a single event, that changed the entire course of history in ways no one could have predicted. The 1941 flight to Scotland wasn't just a journey, it was the turning point. Stay with me, because the truth behind it is far more shocking than it appears. The mysterious death at Spandau Prison in 1987. A deep and almost unbelievable situation unfolded around Rudolf Hess, and once everything was laid out step by step, the whole thing started to feel like one of those stories that stayed in the mind long after hearing it. At the Nuremberg trials in 1946, Hess received a life sentence for crimes against peace, and from that moment forward, life changed into something that many people could hardly imagine. 40 years in prison followed, not 10, not 20, but 40 long years behind walls. Just think about that for a second. How does any human being sit through 4 decades in confinement without ever stepping back into normal life? Reports explain that during all that time, no sign of regret came from Hess regarding the actions tied to the Nazi regime. That alone raised a quiet but heavy question. How could someone live that long, reflect that much, and still never show remorse? Conditions inside Spandau Prison added another layer to the story. The cost of keeping Hess locked up reached nearly $2,000 per day, and as many as 10 guards watched over a single prisoner at any given time. That level of security made the situation feel almost unreal. Why would one elderly man require such intense monitoring? Britain, France, and the United States pushed several times for release, especially as age and health began to decline. Each request pointed to the same reasoning: old age, failing health, and the belief that continued imprisonment no longer served a real purpose. But the Soviet Union refused every single appeal. Determination remained firm. The sentence would last for life, no exceptions, no matter the condition. Time moved forward, and by 1966, something even more unusual began to take shape. Hess became the only remaining inmate in a prison originally built to hold 600 people. Imagine that scene clearly. One man inside a space designed for hundreds. Silence must have filled every corridor. Echoes must have followed every step. For 21 years, from 1966 to 1987, complete isolation defined daily life. No other prisoners, no shared routines, no conversations across cells. That kind of loneliness naturally leads to another question. What does isolation like that do to a human mind over time? Prison officials slowly adjusted certain rules as the years passed. A chapel area became living space, offering more room than a typical cell. Small comforts appeared, including access to a way to prepare tea. Even with these changes, emotional distance remained strong. For over 20 years, Hess refused all family visits. That decision alone carried a strange weight. Why turn away from family for so long, especially in a place like that? Only in 1969 did a change happen, and that change came after a serious health issue involving a perforated ulcer. At that point, Hess finally agreed to see family, including a wife and an adult son. That meeting must have carried years of silence, tension, and unanswered thoughts. Then came the final chapter, and it unfolded on August 17, 1987. The day started like many others, with a routine walk in the prison garden. An American guard accompanied Hess, following standard procedure. Nothing seemed unusual at first glance, but within minutes, everything changed. Hess entered a small cottage used as a reading room, a quiet place inside the prison grounds. Shortly after, the guard discovered a shocking scene. Hess was found slumped over with an electrical cord wrapped tightly around the neck, while the other end was tied to a window latch. Just pause for a moment and think about that discovery. How does a situation move from a normal daily walk to something so final in such a short span of time? Immediate action followed. Hess was rushed to a British military hospital, but despite all efforts, death was confirmed at 4:10 p.m. An autopsy later concluded that death came from asphyxiation caused by compression of the neck due to suspension. A farewell note addressed to family was found in a pocket, which supported the official explanation. All 4 Allied powers released a joint statement declaring the death a voluntary death. On paper, everything seemed clear, simple, and concluded. But was everything truly that straightforward? Doubts quickly began to surface, especially from family and legal representatives. A son and a lawyer strongly challenged the conclusion, pointing to physical limitations. At 93 years old, Hess suffered from severe arthritis and general weakness. That detail raised a serious question. Could a man in that condition truly carry out such an act without assistance? The argument suggested that physical strength required for such an action might not match the condition of a person at that age. Even with these concerns, the official ruling remained unchanged. Voluntary death stood as the final explanation. Soon after, another major decision followed. Spandau Prison was demolished within weeks. The reason behind that move centered on preventing the site from becoming a place of gathering or symbolic importance for neo-Nazi supporters. That decision closed the physical chapter of the story, but questions and thoughts continued to linger. What really went through Hess's mind during those final moments? Did isolation, age, and time slowly shape that outcome? Or did unanswered factors remain hidden beneath official conclusions? The entire situation leaves behind a quiet, unsettling feeling like something just doesn't fully add up. Even with official reports, detailed statements, and carefully presented findings, there are still gaps that refuse to close, shadows that linger no matter how hard you try to ignore them. It's the kind of story that stays with you, making you question what might have been missed, or perhaps deliberately left out. And just when it seems like the mystery will never truly be solved, everything takes a sudden turn. Because in 2025, a revelation finally emerged, and what was uncovered changes everything. Stay with me because this final piece might be the one that redefines the entire story. The 2025 revelation, what was finally solved. For decades, there had been this lingering doubt surrounding the man known as Prisoner Number 7 in Spandau Prison. And that doubt did not just come from random speculation or wild imagination. Suspicion started even before arrival at the prison and somehow managed to survive for almost 70 years, which already raises a simple question. How does a single idea hold on for that long without completely falling apart? That idea claimed that the man inside the prison was not actually Rudolf Hess, but an imposter who had taken the place of the real Hess. Now think about that for a second. A high-ranking Nazi official, one of the closest figures to Adolf Hitler, possibly replaced without the world truly knowing. It sounds unbelievable, yet the belief spread so widely that even powerful figures like Franklin D. Roosevelt and Allen Dulles privately considered the possibility. That alone makes anyone pause. If people at that level had doubts, then what exactly were they seeing or hearing that made the theory feel real? The idea itself grew into something bigger over time, almost like a cultural legend that refused to disappear. Some believed the supposed switch was done to cover up a secret killing, possibly carried out by German intelligence or even British intelligence. That claim alone raises another question. Why would anyone go to such lengths to hide the death of one man, even a man as important as Hess? Was there something more that the public was never meant to know? As the years passed, the theory kept gaining attention, and one of the strongest voices supporting it came from someone who had direct access to the prisoner. That person was Dr. W. Hugh Thomas, the prison doctor at Spandau Prison. Now this is where things start to feel even more unsettling, because Thomas was not just repeating rumors. Thomas claimed to have observed details firsthand, and those details did not match the known physical history of Hess. Thomas pointed to the absence of certain chest scars that Hess was supposed to have from a World War I bullet wound. That is not a small detail. A wound like that leaves a permanent mark, so the question becomes obvious. How could such a defining feature simply not be there? Then there was the issue of dental differences. Historical records suggested that Hess had a gap in the front teeth, yet photographs of the prisoner did not clearly show that same feature. Again, another mismatch. And then things got even stranger. The prisoner refused to see family members for 28 years. 28 years. Think about that. What kind of person refuses contact with family for nearly 3 decades? Was that fear, shame, or something else entirely? On top of that, there were claims of memory loss. The prisoner reportedly suffered from amnesia, which only added another layer of confusion. At this point, it almost starts to feel like a puzzle with too many missing pieces. Each detail on its own might not prove anything, but when combined, it creates a picture that makes people question everything. To make matters worse, prison officials did not allow a proper comparison of dental records. That decision alone fueled even more suspicion. Why block something that could easily confirm identity? That simple refusal made many people feel like something was being hidden. And once that kind of doubt takes root, it spreads quickly. Over time, the imposter theory moved far beyond serious investigators and into public imagination. It became one of those stories that people bring up again and again, always asking the same question. What if the man in that prison was not who everyone thought? Then, after decades of speculation, something unexpected happened that slowly began to shift the entire conversation. Back in 1982, a U.S. Army doctor named Philip Pittman took a blood sample from the prisoner during a routine health check. At the time, nothing about that moment seemed extraordinary, just a normal medical procedure. But sometimes the smallest actions end up becoming the most important later on. That sample was preserved carefully by a pathologist named Rick Wall, who sealed it on a microscope slide and kept it for teaching purposes. No one could have guessed how valuable that tiny sample would become years later. Fast forward to 2019, and a group of scientists at the University of Salzburg decided to finally test the truth behind all those years of doubt. Instead of relying on visual clues or second-hand observations, the team turned to something far more reliable: DNA. Specifically, the scientists focused on the Y chromosome, which passes from father to son along the male line. This method allowed a comparison between the old blood sample and a living relative of Hess. Now think about how precise that approach is. No guesswork, no assumptions, just pure biological evidence. The results came back with a 99.99% probability that both samples belonged to the same paternal line. At that moment, a huge question that had lingered for decades finally received a clear answer. The conclusion was simple but powerful. The prisoner known as Spandau No. 7 was indeed Rudolf Hess. No imposter, no secret replacement, no hidden identity, just the real man all along. And that truth carried a weight that many people did not expect. Because once the identity was confirmed, another realization followed immediately. There was no alternate ending where the real Hess escaped and lived freely somewhere else. There was no hidden life, no secret exile, no second chance away from consequences. Instead, the truth showed that Hess spent 46 years in prison, locked away from the world until death in 1987. That realization raises another uncomfortable question. Why does the truth feel less satisfying than the theory? In many ways, the imposter story offered a sense of mystery, a possibility that something bigger had happened behind the scene. But reality turned out to be much simpler and maybe even harsher. The man who stood beside Hitler remained in prison for decades, aging in isolation, carrying the weight of history until the very end. Even the circumstances of death still spark debate, which adds yet another layer of uncertainty to the story. In 2011, the remains of Hess were removed, and the grave was destroyed to prevent it from becoming a place of gathering for extremist groups. That decision closed the final physical chapter of the story, but the questions and discussions did not completely disappear. Because even with scientific proof, some people still wonder, was everything really that straightforward? Or did decades of suspicion leave a mark that cannot easily fade? Sometimes, even when the truth is clear, the human mind continues to ask questions, searching for something deeper, something hidden just out of reach. The troubling death of a 93-year-old man who could barely tie his shoes was the actual end of Rudolf Hess. With this, we have come to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, do well to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. To enjoy more thrilling stories, click now on the following video that pops up on your screen.